October is Transport Month in South Africa. It is also the month in which the face of Sandton will change for the Eco Mobility Festival 2015. The focus will shift from cars to public transport and eco-friendly ways of travel. Join me, Christine Mundo, and the Business Spotlight team as we find out how people living and working in Sandton will be affected by this festival. Sandton will be transformed into a living laboratory or test site, and the people and their transport habits the test subjects. What is the idea behind eco-mobility?
Eco-mobility, I suppose, stands for eco and mobility, so it's ways of moving which are eco-friendly or environment-friendly, which would promote sustainability. So we regard the key eco-mobile modes as being public transport, walking and cycling. But even things like skateboarding and uniways and sedgeways, they all form part of the eco-mobility family. In terms of the festival is really an opportunity for a month long to identify some streets where it would be car-free and it would be eco-mobility friendly, so that eco-mobility modes would be given prominence. And that's really what we want to be doing in the Sandton CBD in the month of October. The Eco-Mobility Festival is an international festival. The first time it was held was in Suwon in South Korea, and I'm sure the organizers of it, ICLEI, would then want to hold it in different kinds of cities across the world. And it's really a way of envisaging the future and showing the future.
The first Eco-Mobility World Festival transformed an area of Suwon in South Korea into a much more relaxed, eco-friendly and community-friendly neighborhood for the month of September 2013. At first, the community resisted the idea, and they felt very inconvenienced by the disruption caused by construction to adapt the neighborhood to new ways of movement in the area.
이 사업을 추진하면서 사실은 이것이 될 것인가, 이제 우리나라에서도 처음이고 세계에서도 처음이고 한 달간 이렇게 차 없는 마을 하는 게 주민들이 과연 차를 빼줄 것인가, 우리가 이제 많은 노력을 해서.
The Eco-Mobility World Festival is driven by ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, a worldwide movement of cities committed to creating a sustainable future. Johannesburg is a long-standing member of ICLEI. The first festival in Suwon, South Korea, attracted over 1 million national and international visitors. Local innovators and businesses welcomed the opportunity to demonstrate their mobility alternatives to conventional fossil fuel vehicles.
Eco-mobility, as we at ICLEI understand it, and as I understand it, is reversing the paradigm of transport planning and giving the environmentally friendly modes of transport priority. This means start with walking. What you can't walk, you would cycle. Where you can't take the bicycle, you may take any other sort of non-motorized vehicle, any push or pull cart or anything that may help. And when this doesn't help, you can take public transport. So with this new paradigm of planning, bottom-up planning, we want to go into a city and show how eco-mobility can work in a real city with real people in real life, in real time.
The selected neighborhood in Suwon is very different from the very busy Sandton CBD. It is smaller, with 4,300 residents and only 1,500 registered cars. So what inspired the city of Johannesburg to take such an ambitious step to host the festival here?
It's usually where certain cities then want to advance certain causes or certain ideals relating to environmental awareness, relating to green spaces. If you know that in Johannesburg, since our mayor, Councillor Pakstau, being on, he has always focused on green environment, managing waste, environmental friendliness. And then the city is going to invest more than 150 million rands to introduce a new public transport system in Sandton. And we're using then the Eco-Mobility Festival as a trajectory to actually begin to introduce people to that. So that is the cause in terms of making sure that people are aware of how best they can actually navigate the CBD centers.
For us in Sandton, we're doing a lot of work because we are very keen to build a public transport, walking and cycling friendly CBD. So the Eco-Mobility Festival will be the kickstart of a lot of very important changes in Sandton to be able to make Sandton friendly for public transport, walking and cycling. Because if we think that we can keep bringing a number of cars into Sandton that presently are there, Sandton will be a complete gridlock, and it is likely that companies would want to move out of Sandton to places where there's less traffic congestion.
We all know Sandton has the synonymous of congestion, traffic related to the name, and of course with the recent Sandton transportation study that the SID commissioned to do, it was almost an immediate answer for the city to say, let's host this event, let's have public dialogues around traffic. How can we deal with congestion? Sharing those ideas, because with this eco-mobility, the city is inviting a lot of the mayors from all over the world, sharing what challenges they have in their successful nodes, and hopefully the learnings they've got, they will bring into Sandton as well. And we could also try and see we could adapt it to us and make it, make Sandton an accessible space through, be it public transport, cycling, walking. Those are alternative modes of transport other than the four-wheeler car that we are so used to being in South Africa.
The commuters who travel into and out of Sandton every day can attest to the large numbers of vehicles on the roads coming into Sandton and in the CBD itself.
Studies that we have conducted in terms of the Sandton master plan, we know that it's about 100,000 people who comes into Sandton peak hour in the morning, and they leave later in the evening. Actually, maybe about 90,000, but 10,000 of the people are people who reside in Sandton. So the economy of this biggest economy in Africa, it's actually driven by 100,000 people every day. So we know those dynamics. Now, the number of people creating these trips coming to, we know about 55% of them are arriving in this space in private cars, and about 40 to 45% of them in public transport already. So taxis are operating in this space, buses are operating in this space. So we already know that there's that public transport movement that is already happening here.
The biggest problem, Jimmy, is really that most people come into Sandton by car. The demand for car traffic just grows. There's very little alternative for people to use. Basically, they're reliant on the car. The Gautrain has had a major impact, but at the moment it's not much of a network. It doesn't offer an alternative for everybody. So what you find then is that the pressure for cars just increases and increases, and it's not really possible to add more road links. You know, Sandton is really surrounded by residential development, high-end residential development. Besides the cost of new road upgrades, there's not really even a cost-effective alternative. So therefore the biggest challenge is really to reduce the need to travel by car, to change the city in a way that would give people alternatives, being able to cycle, walk, take buses and so forth.
If you ask people who travel into Sandton by car why they don't opt for public transport to avoid the frustrations inherent in being stuck in slow-moving traffic for at least a couple of hours a day, they will tell you that the public transport in the city has a long way to go before it could begin to measure up to the big cities in Europe. The city hopes that by improving public transport during the festival, it will begin to encourage a change in commuting behavior.
Well, in fact, Sandton is a very big public transport hub, and it's not properly recognized and doesn't properly cater for public transport. So one of the key things that we're doing is we are bringing the BRT. The BRT will in fact come down Oxford Road, but not in a dedicated lane, and then from Alexandra on dedicated lane along Catherine. And then as all the public transport get into Sandton, we are taking away one lane off Rivonia, Fredman and 5th, and that'll constitute like a loop, so that different public transport will then be able to stop, and they'll have complete access, but it'll only be dedicated for public transport. And then also after the festival, there'll also be some public transport going down West Street. So it'll be much easier for people to get on and get off public transport. It'll also make the Gautrain reach wider, because people could get out of the Gautrain and get into a dedicated loop very speedily to go to any places around the loop. So in that way, we really hope to make the area more public transport friendly.
When the city of Johannesburg decided to have the Eco Mobility Festival in Sandton in October, they of course had to discuss the idea with stakeholders, How did people react?
Initially, a lot of negativity and also said, oh no, what now? It's going to be further congestion. And of course, their immediate reaction is their immediate investment, their asset, their building. What is it going to do to Sandton? How are we going to explain that to our tenants, and how are we going to get our employees to work and all that? But I think through the many consultations and public briefings we've had, they've also come to a lot of sense and a collaboration and understanding that there is a need to deal with the congestion, how we travel into Sandton, and how can we sustain Sandton for the next 10, 20 years instead of, because we don't do anything and we don't intervene now. There will be a chance that Sandton, a lot of our tenants will be moving to other alternative nodes, competitive nodes, and we do not want that. And I think the collective feels that this is for the good for Sandton.
We're having a very strong partnership with Sandton CID, Central District developers. That's wonderful. We're having a good relationship where they're meeting with SAPOA, Sandton South African property owners. Now, everybody, they like the idea. But you see, somebody then looks at the point of saying, but it's going to impact on me now, you know? And the question that we keep on asking is, when does it start? Because Sandton at the moment, it's becoming difficult to access with your car. When do we start? When do we start a point whereby we're saying, let's change this thing? So the reception is good, but obviously people will be concerned, people have worries. Are my staff going to arrive on time at work? Am I going to find public transport? And these are the things that we are actually addressing and dealing with.
There's always resistance when you try and implement something new. But I think the more they see it, that's when they'll start accepting the change. But I think for me, even though we get negative response or whatever positive, but we shouldn't stop. We should still continue, and ultimately people will accept change.
Sandton they say it's the richest square mile in Africa. The Sandton CBD is the richest space that we can ever have in South Africa and in Africa. Now, if you want to plan for something like that in a space like that, obviously then you need to have partners working with you strongly on that. And the partners are property owners in the space. The partners are people who are living and working in these spaces. That becomes your critical partners. So in terms of the planning cycle first, we're going out to public meetings, we are doing public meetings, we're talking to all but that could be affected, we're going into companies, and then we're talking with property owners to say, this is coming, and what are the benefits of this into that? And then from that point on, then you go to your logistics in terms of transport planning design. Because you're going to affect normal way of traffic moving into the space, you need to have a proper transport plan. So we have engineering companies that then are helping us with the transport plan. But the transport alone, it's not enough. Then you need to come up to the point of, if you're going to close the street, what happens in these streets when they are closed, some of them, or it's difficult to access them with a car? Then you need to have an events management company that then is going to activate activities to make sure that people then come and enjoy the streets. So there's are those things.
In Suwon, certainly people took to enjoying the different atmosphere in their streets. After the break, we'll be back to talk about the likelihood of cycling, walking and a healthier lifestyle taking shape in the Sandton CBD during the Eco Mobility Festival and in the long term. Welcome back to Business Spotlight. When these tuk-tuks were first introduced in Sandton, not everyone was impressed, but today they've become an endearing and important part of Sandton street life. How do you think people will take to cycling to and from work?
Cycling is the trend that's really taking the world by storm. It's a sustainable mode. It gives you that flexibility. It's a healthy mode. So cycling as an opportunity for Sandton is great. And within 7 kilometers is a very good distance to cycle to work every day. Within 7 kilometers, about 60–70% of people coming into Sandton every day. That would give an option for them. So cycling is a real alternative, and the Eco-Mobility Festival is going to obviously look at cycle lanes and see how can people start using cycling in a safe way as an alternative to travelling by car.
We're also looking at quite a lot of cycle promotion legacy projects, including donating bikes to people in Alexandra so that they could use the infrastructure that we are building, as well as maybe a bike and skate park along the Giske River in Alexandra. Then the second leg is what we call the transport management plan, and that's really building a plan where we will close off some roads, but also making sure that there is a lot of alternative transport. And we are also looking at some dedicated lanes for public transport coming into Sandton.
With large numbers of people driving to Sandton from way beyond the suggested 7-kilometer radius for cycling into the CBD, what plans will be in place to help them leave their cars behind?
Let me just say that the organizing principle for the alternative transport is, on the one hand, the existing public transport to make it more accessible, to increase the frequencies, and to increase the amount. So there is Metrobus. We'll hopefully be able to put on more buses with more frequencies. There is minibus taxis. We want to let them have decals and be able to explain to people how they can use minibus taxis, because a lot of people do. And then there is also the Gautrain, which will be running at 10-minute frequencies. It's already started. So to work with the Gautrain, encourage more people to use the train. Also for them to use the train a little bit in the shoulder of the peaks, because it's very crowded in the peak. So that's the first thing.
You'll be happy to know that actually the company that worked with us during the 2010 World Cup in developing the park and rides, it's actually one of the companies helping us with the transport plan for this area. We have already identified strategic areas where people can actually park their cars and then jump into public transport and access the space. Some of the, I can't mention their names at the moment, but some of the major spaces around Sandton, they've already committed us parking bays that we can use. So we have a number of park and rides that we are signing the contracts with. We're going to make sure that those park and rides are safe, are well lit in other areas. We are looking at a situation whereby from Monte Casino, from Fourway side, we can actually dedicate some of the lanes for high occupancy vehicles. So high occupancy vehicles is where vehicles with more people in it. So if you're driving alone, you'll have to drive into there. But if there's 4 of you in a car, there's a taxi, there's a bus, and those lanes then can be used for people to actually go faster within the routes.
During the month-long festival, a number of exhibitions will also introduce people to alternative modes of transport with a greener lifestyle in mind.
Eco-mobility is over 2 issues. Eco being eco-friendly, so we are looking at less carbon footprint. Then of course the mobility, yes, we are talking about traveling, be it walking, by having more wider walkways, and cycling as a potential another alternative. Eco cars, the electric cars, because part of the event there will also be a lot of displays of eco electric cars. Then we will have to look at shopping centres and possibly corporates who have electric docking charging machines for these type of cars, and also generally anything that possibly is eco-mobile, less carbon footprint, because ultimately we have one Earth. We've got to protect it.
Eco-mobility for me is a redefinition of how we see mobility, how we organize mobility. Let's decrease the emission, let's decrease the accidents, let's decrease the amount of money which is invested in mobility. Mobility, it's a high inefficiency system, but it's extremely expensive. We invest so much money in a system which not really does work.
Third leg is a international exhibition where there'll be an exhibition of all kinds of eco-mobility vehicles, solar charging centres, and there'll also be a test track so members of the public can try and use these different kind of vehicles. There'll be a bike pump park where people can learn how to bike and play around with bikes and so on.
If you look at the street like West Street and Mod Street, we're going to change that street into a more pedestrianized street where there's more walking, the sidewalks are wider, and it's easier for people to walk and cycle in those streets. So it's not really closing, but it's then functioning the street differently. So people still access the street, people can still walk into the street. And then when we're doing that, we're going to have over time what we're calling the exhibition, where we need to exhibit some of these energy-friendly and eco-friendly vehicles within the space. So a space just behind the Gautrain station, that's going to be an exhibition area there. And then from there, you can go there and test some of these nice cars that are using electricity, which is solar powered, that are using batteries, so that you can understand a city with lesser noise, a city with lesser emissions, and then that's how it's going to be.
Our second week, the week from the 5th to the 9th, is like an international week. So there's going to be a lot of dialogues and debates and international mayors coming and very interesting guest speakers from all around the world. So we'd encourage everybody to, and all of it will be free, to be able to register and then come and enjoy Sandton in October.
I think these are all type of dialogues that could be talked about, and hopefully some of these innovative ideas can come out from this event as well. Yes, and also putting highlights it around eco-mobility into Sandton makes Sandton more in the news, and I think it's also good for property owners to have that exposure, good or bad, you know, because that opens dialogues. And I don't think any publication or any news around Sandton can be good or bad because we're all talking about it.
And we've got some very exciting street activities so that not only the people of Sandton experience the car-free, other people come and see that streets can be used for other kinds of activities. We're going to have a big open streets event where we're closing all the streets between Alex and Sandton on a Sunday and allow people to walk, and you know, people from all walks of life can experience Sandton or Alexandra as the case may be, because as you know, our community is very fragmented and many people in Johannesburg have never been into Alexandra.
Is this Eco-Mobility World Festival 2015 in the heart of Sandton likely to be a success and have a long-lasting impact on travel and lifestyle in the CBD?
I think the Eco-Mobility Festival could very well work as a festival, but in the first instance, the whole objective is to make people consider alternatives. And if you for a whole month had to think about another way to get to work, maybe that idea will stick, and it will actually, you know, create this idea that maybe I don't have to have my car, maybe I found alternatives. Maybe it's more fun sitting in a bus and reading my emails than actually sitting in my car and being frustrated by other cars and taxis. It would be very important to get a sense of how people travel before the event, and if it had an impact on people's behavior, that would be a very good idea to consider. Has it had an impact on people? Some interviews before, interviews afterwards.
I don't think and one event would solve the problem, but I think what it will do is to encourage dialogue, and let's start being aware of what other ways can we travel. We still have a long way to go in terms of getting all our public transport in a more one system way where it's more easier for commuters to travel, but definitely this event will certainly bring up some dialogues, some maybe innovative ways to think about things.
When comparing Sandton and Suwon, Sandton is a much more ambitious project to tackle. Suwon was in an underdeveloped area when it was chosen as the pilot project for the Eco-Mobility World Festival. Sandton continues to develop at a rapid rate, becoming more congested as more and more big office parks and buildings rise up.
You know, initially when we thought of doing this, we wanted to go and do this in Maboneng precinct there. It's hidden there, so that we can play with this model and see how it works, and then come from with it, and then let's introduce it to other areas. But the mayor said, you want people to start talking about public transport. You want people to start talking about healthy living lifestyle. Make sure that you do this in a space whereby people will talk about it. The international world, the international media will focus on us. And in that way, it's the best way to begin to say, we've learned this, let's try this in Soweto CBDs. Let's try this in Randburg CBDs. Let's try this in the entire CBD and see how we can improve. So look at it as almost a pilot that is going to help us to improve public transport in the city of Johannesburg.
And while the city of Johannesburg experiments with Sandton to see how its congestion problems could be solved and how its people might adapt to a more eco-friendly and eco-mobile environment, the world will be watching. And international participants in the festival will be talking and taking lessons learned back home.
So for me, the learning is it's possible. It's possible to mobilize so much attention, so much activity around a one-month project. I feel strongly encouraged to pursue my plan to organize an Eco-Mobility World Festival every year in a different city in a different country in the world. I think what will remain is a certain spirit in the community that if we all work towards it, if we all work together, then we can change our urban living conditions tremendously. And I think this cannot be eradicated anymore. This sits now in the neighborhood, sits in people's minds and hearts, and that's, I think, probably one of the greatest achievements that the project has made.
It will be very interesting to see how people will respond to this adventurous initiative in October. Just imagine a more community-oriented Sandton and me coming to work on a bicycle. Join me again next month for another episode of Business Spotlight.